Marc Marquez wins in Qatar for the first time since 2014. He said it was a track that he thought his rivals would have an upper hand on him. Didn't look like that, did it? He was truly special over the weekend in Losail. Plenty of drama throughout the field though, and we'll get straight into it with Jorge Martin. Joining me, Jordan Moreland, is Lewis Duncan and Pete McLaren to discuss everything from Qatar. Lewis, Jorge Martin, will start there straight away. The world champion made his return this weekend, and it ended in the worst way possible for him. Another set of fresh injuries after a really unlucky and nasty incident with Fabio Di Giannantonio. His condition is, well, he's okay relatively, but the injuries are quite nasty, aren't they?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate set of circumstances that Jorge Martin has found himself in. We last saw him day one of the Sepang test where he fractured his wrist and a couple of other bones, and then he fractured more bones, fractured his wrist quite badly in a training accident before Thailand. Has been out since, cleared to come back in Qatar, and as far as we've been updated from Aprilia, he's got we think about 11 fractures in his ribs after a really unfortunate accident. And in the Grand Prix at turn 12, he was looks like he was struck by VR46's Fabio Di Giannantonio. It was going to be a sore crash on its own, but without Digio there, you have to think that perhaps the outcome was a bit different. So it really was just a very unfortunate set of circumstances. We believe Martin's also got a collapsed lung, or there's certainly some fluid in his lungs that needs to be taken care of. So he's going to be stuck in Qatar for a few days. Can't fly like that. So yeah, I probably haven't said anything, and we're not going to speculate, but it does look very unlikely we're going to see Jorge Martin again for another couple of rounds at least, which is unfortunate to say the least, because he's already thousands and thousands of kilometres down in bike preparation time compared to his rivals. He had a good weekend, all in all, really, in Qatar. You know, he struggled in FP1 as you would expect. Then the second practice session was decent. He very, very close to getting into Q2 and qualifying. He was about a tenth and a half outside of it, and he was not very far away from his teammate Marco Bezzecchi, which, frankly, if you're Aprilia, should be a bit of a warning sign as to, you know, we need to get Marco going a bit more, because we can't have the world champion just turning up below full fitness, not comfortable in the bike, not got a seating position properly, and almost beating him there. So that's... Yeah, as one of those little side plots of the weekend, I think Marco Bezzecchi's got a lot of work to do there. The sprint was good. He overtook Pecco Bagnaia. He was running close to the top 10, and then he faded, but that's fine. We expected that. The Grand Prix was a bit tougher for him, but really he was just looking to get laps, understand the bike. He didn't do anything wrong, really. It was a pretty innocuous accident. You know, we're not really, we haven't spoken to him, he hasn't spoken to the media, we don't know quite really what happened in there. It looks like he was probably just a little bit wide over the curbs, dropped the front. You know, at that point of the race, his fitness must have been completely crashed at the floor at that point, so you can understand why he would have been making mistakes. And that's the tough thing, I think, is that he didn't really do anything wrong, and he's come out of this setback further. And Aprilia, I mean, what have Aprilia got to do to find a bit of luck? You know, it's just been one thing after another, and there's not much more to say about it. This season is obviously a complete write-off now in terms of, I think, even hope to get any decent results just when he gets back on the bike and he's fit. You know, he's got so much work to do to get to understand that bike. An unfortunate one, and we just, obviously, our hearts go out to Jorge, because it's not what we wanted to see for the world champion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll say that, echo that. Jorge, all our thoughts are with you, and yeah, in the recovery, it's so unfortunate, isn't it, Pete? Because as Lewis says, like, seeing him overtake Pecco Bagnaia in the sprint was quite something, because obviously Bagnaia had the struggles, but Martin had actually a really decent weekend. It was beyond my expectation for what he was doing. He looked really good on the bike. His style really suits it. He looks great, and you could tell that he was having some physical limitations there, but it's just the worst possible outcome, isn't it? It's that crash at that corner is very... Jake Dixon had a similar one there in 24 and 25. Dixon had a high set, it caught on the curb after, but he had a crash in the race yesterday that was very similar to Martin's, and it's just so unlucky that Martin doesn't go to the outside of the track and he kind of stays on the curb where the rest are, and Di Giannantonio just makes a collision. It's just unfortunate, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. And as Lewis said there, I think you've got to imagine that the physical condition was a factor. His lap times had dropped off, I think, a few laps before, which isn't a surprise. He was in uncharted territory, wasn't he? This is just gone beyond the sprint race distance. So he's doing more laps than he's ever done on the bike this year in a row. And yeah, you've got to imagine that probably if he was fully fit, he might have saved it. We don't know exactly what happened in the accident. As Lewis said, Martin hasn't explained to the media. Obviously, he's got other things on to deal with at the moment. But yeah, I think perhaps, taking this on a bit, it also brings up the whole discussion about should he have been allowed the test before he came back to see how he, his fitness was on the bike, whether he did it on a MotoGP bike or a super bike, who knows? Maybe this, perhaps feeds into that. There's going to be question marks, obviously, about should he have waited a bit longer, come back at the next race in Jerez. But it's too late for all that now. It's happened. It's, just a total nightmare, isn't it? The last 3 times, basically, he's been on a bike, he's ended up in hospital. And, that mentally, that must be so tough for him. That Miguel Oliveira, he's obviously been through a similar situation, if you like, in terms of talking about, let's say, bad luck, in terms of being injured in accidents caused by other riders. And I think he was obviously at Qatar as a spectator with the team because he's injured now. And he was being asked about that, how do you you think about that, the luck side. And he said, look, you can't dwell on it, because if you do, you can get into that kind of negative loop of why do these things happen to me? So you just have to keep focused on the recovery. But, Martin's in that recovery zone again, isn't he? He's all not back to square one, but it's another big setback. And ribs, there's nothing you can do to really speed up the recovery of them, is there? The other injuries that he's had surgery and those kind of things. But ribs, you've just got to wait for them to heal. And, as Lewis says, it's going to be a long time now, I think, before he's back on the bike. And, the only positive thing is, as you guys have said, he was fast, and I think that's something. He third in the warm-up as well, wasn't he, going into the race? So that's something. But really, on the positive side, there's only the fact that he was fast. And let's face it could have been worse, to be hit by another rider like that. The injuries could have been even more serious, but no doubt it's a dark time for Jorge Martin and Aprilia at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say, he posted something on Instagram this morning, a photo of him in the hospital bed, and he said, "Thank God, it could have been a lot worse." And he says, "I'll try and keep you guys updated soon." So yeah, at least he's kind of acknowledged that, and he sent a message out there. And I think it's not good for the fans to kind of see that, yeah, whilst this was pretty horrible, that he's updating everybody and he's kind of, thanking everyone for their support and everything. So yeah, we'll see when Jorge comes back. Like I say, it's the last thing I think he's thinking about at the minute. But I think the weekend for him was surprisingly really positive, and it's a shame because it was good to see kind of the number one on track, and I think it was cool, to be honest. Like, you see that the work that he put in last year, and you see there's number one. Look at that, he looked good on the bike. Just one of them things, really. I think it's a shame, but yeah, let's see when he comes back. And yeah, if you want to keep updated to everything with Jorge Martin, head across to Crouch.net. We'll have everything updated there for when Aprilia send us stuff. And yeah, we'll get into the race now. Lewis, at Marc Marquez. The Grand Prix yesterday was, for me, it's his best win of the season. But to this point, I think he was just managing things to a T. He had everyone pretty much on. I think he was controlling them pretty much because he knew what he had in hand. And yeah, his brother kind of, well, Mark's taking blame for this contact at the start, but yeah, it could have been a bit worse there between the two Marquez brothers if they had made a bit more contact, because he lost a winglet on the rear. Didn't seem to affect him at all. And yeah, he wins in Qatar, like I said in the intro, from the first time since 2014. He's going to take some stopping this year, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the question now is who can beat him? We've only seen one person beat him so far this year, and that was himself. And Pecco Bagnaia fans can get angry all they want, but he wasn't faster than him in Qatar. He just didn't crash. we're looking at a situation where really it should have been 8 out of 8 races, victories, another perfect weekend in Qatar at a track he came into saying, "Oh, Alex Marquez is going to be quicker than me, Pecco's going to be quicker than me. This is a weekend to defend. If I have to lose points, I have to understand that this is because it's Qatar." Pole position, but sprint win and a dominant sprint win as well. He was in full control of that. Yeah. And then the Grand Prix was a funny one because he kind of spoke about this afterwards. He was asked in the race, or all three riders in the podium were asked after the race, why does Qatar produce such interesting races? And Mark was just matter-of-factly, it's fully down to what the fastest rider on the track decides he wants to do. And he recognised, he said on the grid beforehand, I need to look after my front tyre. Rear tyre is going to be critical, everyone knows that, but the front tyre is really, really going to be where you're going to have to look after it. And it did look like after that early contact with Alex Marquez, maybe the damage to the bike maybe that is affecting him a bit. He was overtaken by Pecco, he was overtaken by, obviously Morbidelli took the lead, he was overtaken by Maverick Vinales as well, which we'll get onto in a minute. Yeah. And it kind of looked like, well, actually, yeah, maybe what he was saying is true. And then as soon as Pecco came back, he's locked onto the back of him. You're like, hang on a minute. Either he's pushing really hard just for the sake of, I don't want to be beaten by my teammate, or he's starting to show his true pace there, and it was the latter, obviously. And yeah, once he was, if you actually kind of look at the average pace, and I have a spreadsheet in front of me, which shows you how exciting my Sunday nights are after races. I like to give those, people like to think we have such a glamorous life, and really it's just, it's spreadsheets and
averages.
Yeah. We don't see sunlight because we spend our entire life on Google Sheets. So you look at the average race over the whole race distance. Mark, he was only 600ths quicker than Maverick over the full distance, and he was about just under 2/10 quicker than Pecco, which isn't great for Pecco on that front. But if you look at lap 17, the point where he retook the lead, or I say retook, he took the lead for the first time. He didn't really hold a lead for very much before that point. He was almost 3/10 a lap quicker than Maverick between lap 17 and lap 21.
Yeah.
He was over 6/10 a lap on average quicker than Pecco Bagnaia at that point. 2 successive fastest laps. At that point, you're just looking at a rider that is in total control of not just that Grand Prix, but this entire World Championship. The point situation makes things look a lot closer than they are, but the reality is Mark is in total control with this championship. He is in complete control of that Ducati. He went to a weak circuit for him, all these right corners, and he came away from it saying, we made a big step there, so now we're going to go to these next tracks like Jerez, like Le Mans. And all of a sudden, the thing that was maybe a weakness beforehand, or was a weakness that others would look to exploit, isn't really a problem anymore. And yeah, how do you stop this? The others don't seem able to. Pecco Bagnaia had a weekend where he was genuinely faster on race pace on Friday, and he screwed it up with a needless crash in qualifying. This fuel tank explanation blame thing keeps coming back for his performances in the sprint race, which is, none of the other Ducatis are having it, and it's been he said it's been 2 years now since the sprint format. You honestly tell me you haven't found a fix for this in 2 years? There comes a point where the bike can't be the blame, because it's 2 years of different Ducatis that none of the other riders have said it.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't affect them as much, and it's like, well, where do we draw the line under this one? Is this a psychosomatic thing? Is this just you aren't good enough to ride around that problem? And that's a question we're going to have to start asking: is how good is Pecco Bagnaia in this, overall? Because we're not seeing the double world champion, Ducati's golden child of the past couple of years. We're seeing a rider that is, at best right now, a very shaky number 2 at Ducati, and that's the reality. And all those things, faster than Mark, and he ruins his opportunity, and Mark takes advantage of it and comes away from it looking just stronger. So yeah, we now have to look at this as being, okay, yeah, we've got a long way to go. Who can beat him? Because I don't think anyone can at this stage now.
Yeah. Pete, what do you make of the weekend? Because Lewis touched on, Bagnaia genuinely looked really fast on Friday, and he said it was his best Friday of the year. And wholeheartedly agree with him. He looked really solid, but the qualifying crash, just the not momentum of the weekend. Mark done some completely different qualifying. He kind of just went and done his own thing, and it worked to perfection for him to get pole position. Did Bagnaia really need to push that much? Obviously, you're going to push in qualifying. It's the point of the game, isn't it? You're going to try and do the fastest lap you can, but it just offset everything. So it did. And as Lewis said, the sprint stuff with the fuel tank. And he looked fine in the Grand Prix yesterday. He looks good. He makes good starts, and he does salvage a second place out of this. Yes, it was third on the road, but we'll get into why it was second if you're not paying attention to what happened to Maverick Vinales. But it just is a hammer blow again, isn't it, to Bagnaia? Because he came in, they said, Qatar will be our track. And for a day and a half, it looked like that. But then Mark has just went, no, this is mine now, so it is, sort of thing, and then just kind of took all that momentum that kind of was building for Pecco away again, hasn't he?
Yeah, Mark's come out of this even stronger, isn't he? I think going into the weekend, we weren't sure where we might Mark's level might drop a bit, the others might rise a bit, and then they could sort of meet in the middle of somewhere. And in fact, as you guys have said, his sprint race was more dominant than it was at Kota, which is supposed to be his his special track. So, Marquez certainly after the sprint was all smiles, wasn't he? You could see that it was a big result for him. And then really going into the Grand Prix, you expected Marc to be even more dominant. Certainly Alex Marquez did, didn't he? Because usually over a longer distance and everything else, Marc's better with the used tyres. And as Lewis says, at the end of that race, there was nobody apart from Vinales, who was actually, he was the nearest pace-wise in those closing stages. But Marc did just have it all under control and was riding to his game plan. And title-wise, it's looking very difficult to stop him. This is why this was such a big weekend, wasn't it? Because it was a difficult track, as Marc kept telling everybody, historically for him. So this was a chance to see what can he do at a so-called difficult track. And he just looked like he was in control the whole time. As you say with Bagnaia, the problem is, or not the problem, but the reason it was such a big mistake was that he needed to sort of have a backup lap, didn't he, in qualifying before pushing to the very limit. We heard in Kota, Raul Fernandez, he was really angry with himself, wasn't he? Slightly different situation, but similar in the sense that he crashed without getting a lap on the board, didn't he, in Kota with Raul Fernandez. And Bagnaia's putting himself under pressure, as you guys have said. He's on the back foot then, going into the races, starting so far back. It was trying to beat Marc Marquez, even if you're starting alongside him, is a difficult enough task. Trying to do it when you give him a head start is as we've seen, virtually impossible. So, yeah, that was obviously a big mistake for Pecco that he then carried with him right through the race weekend. Had decent pace, the pace was there in the Grand Prix. As we say, the whole sprint thing with the fuel tank is all still strange. I suppose we should just mention, just for those that say, why don't you just put the Grand Prix tank in and fill it halfway? But you can't do that because the rules are about the tank size. They're not about how much fuel you put in the tank. It's about the tank size. So that's why they can't just swap the tanks over and fill, the Grand Prix tank up halfway, because as we see, he has no problem with pace halfway through a race on the Grand Prix tank. And as he says, he doesn't have a problem in qualifying with the low fuel. So it is a really confusing one that they're trying to get around there. But it's just all playing into Marc's hands, isn't it? But I suppose, the Vinales factor, as you say, that we're going to come on to, it just spices things up a bit. There was somebody that at least took the fight to him, made a bit of a race of it, even if, as Lewis says, it was tactics for Marc. And this probably also brings up thinking ahead to Pirelli, the new tyres coming in. These races where the riders can't go flat out, they tend to be more entertaining, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
So let's hope this change of tyres, that we do see the tyre wear thing come in a little bit more, riders having to be a bit more tactical, because otherwise, if you're back to sort of the 800cc era, the Bridgestones, where people can ride flat out from start to finish, it tends to produce pretty boring racing. So I'm all for tyre wear.
Absolutely, I'll sign up to that. Lewis, anything to add on Pecco versus Marc?
The one thing I will say about Pecco, and the one thing that I want to hear more of, is that he did come to the post-race press conference on Sunday and was like, okay, yeah, podium was good, but I am angry because if I can do this on a Sunday, I have to do this on a Saturday. It wasn't like, he wasn't then being like, the bike has to do this. He did say, I have to be doing this. There is still this element of blaming the bike and blaming the fuel tank, but I think, there is an element of he has taken a bit of accountability, which has been his problem this year. You know, you think back to after Argentina, where he was like, "Oh, I'm just going to switch back to the GP24," because, you know, Pecco blames things too much. He needs to start taking more accountability, and I want to hear more of that going forward. I want to hear more of him going, "I'm the problem here, not the bike," because, you know, we've heard from Ducati, they're patient with him, but they say the same things. You know, well, clearly he shouldn't be in this position, but we don't really know why. We don't really know, you know, what can we do to we have to help him, but then they don't offer a solution. Oh, maybe we need to try this, maybe we need to try that. It's just, well, we have to help him, but it's like, clearly they're wanting to say he needs to help himself a bit. And we need to start hearing more of that from Pecco. At least he was angry after the race, but that's, you know, at the end of the day, like, he isn't faster than Marc Marquez right now. And, you know, Alex Marquez's kind of ping pong race was sort of masked the fact that he was probably on for a podium, and so was Digia as well. So there might have been a bit more pain there from Bagnaia, and that would have been really difficult to swallow if Digia and Alex Marquez are up there faster than him. And when you look at the start of the season so far, Alex has been clearly the second fastest Ducati rider right now, and Digia is kind of creeping up there to being sort of around about the same level as Pecco Bagnaia right now. So, you know, there's a lot of difficult days ahead for Pecco while he tries to figure this out. And at present, I'm not 100% convinced he can, because we just haven't seen evidence of that yet.
Yeah, for me, it's the part of the race yesterday when Bagnaia got past Marc. I was thinking, well, here we go, now let's see what we can do. And you said about Lewis, the way Marc slashed onto his rear. I was like, no, we're not doing this today. I've got something more in hand, and just waited, got him, and Pecco couldn't answer him. Yes, people could say it's because he had to come through the pack, and he maybe burned up his tyres a bit more at the start. I don't think if Pecco Bagnaia was starting beside Marc Marquez, it would have made a difference yesterday. I think Marc Marquez would have won regardless, because for me it was a tactical masterclass when you look at the race pace. You've said about his average. I've got this sheet in front of me here. There's a spread of 4 laps. I think it's around 9 to go. He does a 52.734. Next lap, a 52.734. And then the next lap is a 52.8, and then a 52.7 again. And then he drops in those fastest laps. Like, just nothing. Like, that's someone who has jumped onto a factory Ducati, has went, this is just making my life so much easier, and he's making everyone on that bike look not bad. He's just making them look like something different. He is just making the difference with his riding style. I think it's the most complete Marc Marquez we've ever seen, and it's crazy to say that when you've seen the 2019 version, who was just flat out god tier fast on bikes. He was doing things that people couldn't do, but he's different. He's so more calculated, he's so much more smarter, and he thinks so much on the bike, which is, when he speaks before the race about telling you his plan of what his key is to manage the front tire, and he does it. He tells you what he's going to do, essentially, and he does that, and then just produces an absolutely brilliant finish to the end of the race, where his lap times have just put everyone to rest. I think there's no disrespect to Pecco, he just can't live with him. I think it's, unless something dramatically changes over the next few rounds, if Bagnaia makes a step in the test, or we get to Magello, where obviously he's very strong, but I don't think Marc's going to go anywhere. And it's a lesson for everyone coming into this weekend thinking that Marc was going to be slower. No, not for me. I think that this is the way it's going to be throughout the year, essentially. If you think Marc's going to struggle, he's not, because he's just, he's different gravy, to be honest, compared to the rest. And I think there's no shame in that, because it's about appreciating the talent that he has. And that's really all I want to say, because I didn't think I'd ever see Marc Marquez get close to levels of his best ever again, but it's completely different this time. It's so not Lorenzo-like in that sense, where he's so nice and smooth and clean, but he's so methodical and so just, he's a killer, isn't he? He just does what he's going to do and executes it to perfection. So I thought Maverick Vinales was going to throw a spanner in the works, Pete, with the KTM. It was going to be Maverick's how could I say, this sounds disrespectful, his one race a year where he does things where you're like, how has Maverick Vinales produced this? But he was docked with a 16-second penalty for tire pressure infringements. He loses the second place and drops all the way back to 14th. He doesn't seem to really care about that, to be honest. He seems that he's happy with his performance on track, and that the KTM has made a step in his hands anyway. What did you make of Maverick's race? Because when you seen him start to close in, it was quite exciting, wasn't it? Because it's like someone's here to challenge, and it was good to see.
Wasn't it? Yeah, completely sort of unexpected, really. Although he has been building, hasn't he? In fairness to Maverick, but he's been a long way off still. Coming up, I mean, no top 10. Okay, he had problems in Qatar with the bike, etc. But and then the sprint, obviously, he went one of those guys that went with the soft rear tyre. That was a disaster, so we never really got to see what his pace would have been on the medium in that race. And then suddenly he comes out in the Grand Prix with the medium that he hadn't done that many laps on, I don't think, over the weekend. They'd be more focused on the soft rear, and suddenly, it's just that Maverick when everything's lined up and everything falls into place, and he's just on brilliant form. Fantastic to see. It's why we love racing. You never quite know what's going to happen, do you? Sometimes, and it just seems like this chatter problem, the vibration that's dogged all of the KTMs, just wasn't there for whatever reason on Sunday. And unfortunately for KTM, I don't think it's obvious how exactly they got rid of it for some of their riders, at least. I think Acosta was the same. He didn't seem to struggle with the vibration that they've had previously. I think Brad Binder did. I think Bastianini might have as well. So there were different KTMs, weren't there, on track in terms of the parts they were using and the exhausts and the rear units and all that kind of stuff. I think that Vinales' bike was a bit different to the others, so I guess the others will be wanting to use whatever his specification was, obviously, at Ereth next time to try it. But the only issue is that it's Qatar, isn't it? It's a night race. It's a unique track. As you say, is this going to be a bit like Kota last year on the Aprilia, where Maverick does something incredible in a Grand Prix and then he's not able to do it again, or is it something that will be repeatable? And obviously KTM will be desperately hoping it is. I think the reason he wasn't too disappointed, as you say, with losing the second place is just because of how bad the situation's been for all the KTMs, isn't it? They're just so pleased to have a competitive race. And I think even the other KTMs were saying, look, they were praising Maverick's ride as well, because they're all feeling the pressure to perform and to get up there. And it does show that if they can get around or somehow shift this vibration chatter issue, the speed is there in the bike. But coming back to the whole tyre pressure thing, I mean, we've been here before, haven't we?
Oh yeah, we've been here before, so we have.
It's a nightmare, isn't it, to have that dreaded message that flashes up at the end of a race. And there was a bit of hope because Acosta escaped a penalty, didn't he, last year, when that was a leaking wheel rim or something, and there was some thoughts that maybe might be a similar thing for Vinales, but no, he got the penalty. And we come back to this whole thing about really this whole tyre pressure system. Probably the fact that Vinales was in the lead for those few laps, just that's where the penalty came from, probably. Fresh air that they wouldn't have expected starting where he was on the grid. And there you go. So you end up doing a much better race than anyone expects, and you sort of end up being punished for it, don't you, in terms of the tyre pressure. So, I mean, what could they do? Tectoy couldn't have really imagined that after the season he'd had, we see Maverick leading for a decent chunk of this race, so we'll raise his starting tyre pressure. So there you are. The teams, they have to sort of look into a crystal ball, come up with a starting tyre pressure. They don't want to put it too high because then their riders would have no chance in the race. But if they put it too low, this is the kind of thing that happens. Presumably, he would have got a message on the dash saying, as we saw with Marc Marquez in Birmingham, perhaps saying, "Look, you need to be careful here. You're not going to be above the 60% of race laps." We don't know exactly. That's not a MotoGP system. That each team has their own system. It's up to the teams and the riders if they want to do that or not, as far as those warning systems. But as he said, he was just focused on looking ahead. He's racing for a win, incredibly, after this sort of nightmare start to the year they've had. The last thing that's on his mind is looking at the dash. So just a real shame. We don't know how much he was under. That's the other thing, isn't it? And then that brings us back to the talk of, should you be allowed this sort of one joker if you're slightly under, rather than just getting this huge 16-second penalty, which, as you say, drops him right down to 14th place. So I mean, he's not in the championship battle, so I guess that's why he's sort of taking it pretty well. But still, you then have the whole podium ceremony and everything else, don't you? Morbidelli, who got promoted, doesn't get to be on the podium. It's just a messy end to a race when you have these kind of penalties.
That's what gets me. The one thing I don't like, the fact that Maverick can go on the podium, get his trophy. You know, all the Tech 3 mechanics and the team are standing down there. They know that there's a penalty potentially coming. It takes away that, just like, because I obviously run the social media accounts, and I wasn't wanting to post Maverick Vinales P2 just to celebrate how good of a result it was, because I knew he might not keep this sort of thing, and it just takes the absolute sting out of it, doesn't it, Lewis? It's one of those things. We've seen it with Dejan Antonio in Valencia in 23 when he was on the podium. It's like, just get rid of this, please. I know it's for safety, but it's just a rule that's so I can't even describe the word I'm going to use here. I don't want to say it. It's just a real, just pointless rule. But it's pointless, but it's not. If that makes sense.
Well, it fundamentally it kills any hopes that we will ever have of seeing surprise results in under these current regulations, because as Pete says, the teams can't set up. Yep. You know, to think that I might be leading for all these laps. Pep Byra said on Saturday after KTM had a terrible Saturday. Pedro Acosta said it was horrendous. Brad Binder said it was the worst race of his life. There was no hope in hell that KTM were ever going to be anywhere up there. But Pep Byra said, top 5 is realistic, but none of our riders should be even remotely thinking about winning the Grand Prix this weekend. So they've set it up to think, okay, we're going to be in the pack. Maverick starting from 6th, he's going to be thereabouts, maybe get the top 5. Maverick rode brilliantly. That's the reality of this. There was no gain from the tyres or anything like that. He just rode really, really well. For whatever reason, the issues that had been plaguing the KTM weren't there. He's been making setup changes, which he's been happy with, but that doesn't really seem to tip the needle one way or the other in terms of the chatter. I think that the race pace being a bit slower than expected, and the medium tyre as well, probably helped kind of mask things, but we don't know. I don't think KTM really understands. That'll be one to keep an eye on over the next few races. But we then have this penalty where this rider's done really well. The team hasn't been able to really account for it, and they get penalised for it. And two things make me angry about it. First of all is that this regulation exists in the first place, because it shouldn't. Michelin should just have made a better front tyre. That's it. Michelin could blame one thing, with the aero, the pressure, blah, 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 blah. This was never really an issue before, and yes, okay, there's been more aerodynamics have added on over the past few years that has been putting a bit more pressure on the front tyre, but they've had several years now to make a fix to that. And they haven't. It's taken them very, very steady, slow, whatever. We then had a tyre that was kind of being tested, or was meant to be tested last year, and it was tested for half an hour at the Misano test. And then all of a sudden, they decide, we can't race it this year because we haven't had enough test time on it. How can the 11 supposed best teams in motorcycle racing in the world, and the 5 best manufacturers, not get their heads together to get a test plan for a tyre that ultimately is for the benefit of them?
Yeah. That's
the thing that I don't get, is that they shot themselves in the foot by just not doing any effort to test this tyre. And yes, there's it's not, it's not easy, you have to keep the manufacturers happy. All right, Dorna, walk into an office, you say to Ducati, KTM, whatever, you're going to be using 3 hours of this post-race test to test this tyre. Deal with it. What, are they honestly going to walk away from the championship? Are they going to go, we're not going to race here anymore? Of course they're not. I just don't understand why the champions didn't strong arm this test through. We see it in Formula 1. They have actual priority tyre tests.
Exactly.
They specifically for that purpose, they extend practice sessions to test new tyres. MotoGP just looks like it is a championship that nobody understands how to run, when it can't figure out how to do some bloody tyre testing that ultimately would have meant that this situation wouldn't have happened in the first place had that 2025 tyre been raced in Qatar, because the whole point of it is to stop it from having the whole tyre pressure issue in the first place. It's not going to be 100%, 100% thing, but I will happily bet quite a lot of money that had that 2025 front tyre been raced, Maverick Vinales wouldn't have lost that podium. And that's the thing that the MotoGP has to take this one on the chin, and we are stuck with this regulation until maybe at least next year when that tyre finally does get introduced. But that then surely depends on them having enough testing time on the tyre this year, which they...
Exactly. When are they going to do it?
Which they might well not. If a test is wet, and we've had that a couple of times already where tests have been wet and they haven't tested them. Riders have had other things to do. What was it? I think a Barcelona test that they had that front tyre there. Nobody touched it because obviously it wasn't going to be introduced this year. But and therein lies the problem, is that they will bring this tyre to test and then nobody tests it because it's not going to be raced. Yeah. And then you end up in a situation again where it's like, well, what do we do? So, and then obviously Michelin isn't going to be here next in 2027. So are they going to see there any point to further develop this tyre and then build all these new units just so that then they can then get put in the bin in 2027? I don't understand why this was never properly thought about, and ultimately all the teams have got to, including Tech 3, have got to take the blame for that, because they should have come up with a better solution to avoid this in the first place. It's hurt their race weekend. It screws the fans over big time. You spend you spend 45 minutes of your life watching a race to then turn it off and go, oh, that was great, and then look on social media a few hours later, oh, the result has completely changed from what I saw on the television. That's a great way to engage new fans. I mean, come on. Like, this has been years now and we're still having the same problem. It's crap. It's total and utter crap.
Yeah, that's the point for me from not even the technical side. It's the whole waiting around for the result after you've just watched a 45-minute race, and you're thinking, well, are you telling me that this is really it's the time process after? Because I said to you, Pete, about the podium. It frustrates me that, because Maverick there's a shot when you look at, it's actually them walking to the podium, and Maverick looks at his bike being checked in Parc Ferme, and he's going, he's obviously been told, well, I can see that they're checking the front tire there, so let's have a look here. And that is just like the worst thing ever, isn't it? As a fan, you want to see the results kind of finish as they are. And yes, Maverick seems like after he knew that was kind of probably going to be the penalty, and he kind of said it doesn't bother me. But deep down, it's like, you want to be rewarded for that, surely, don't you? Because it could have been avoided, as Lewis said, if everything had been put in place for this tyre to be changed. And that's the thing, isn't it, Pete? It could have been avoided.
What if Mark had crashed and Maverick won the Grand Prix?
Bagnaia wins, doesn't he? Then
it just. Then that's an even worse situation. The podium is one thing, a race winner is another one. Yeah, it makes your championship look stupid. I'm sorry, MotoGP, but you look stupid right now because of this.
What do you think, Pete?
It's the worst case scenario is changing a result after the checkered flag, isn't it? And okay, there's always going to be some situations if somebody, a technical rule or something like that. If there's something illegal on the bike, then it's going to happen. But it should be avoided at all costs, shouldn't it? And it does make you wonder, with all this technology, it's supposed to be real time information on the tyres. Couldn't they somehow modify this rule so that the cutoff point is halfway through the Grand Prix? So, if you're not within the pressure rule halfway through the Grand Prix, and then somehow the rider could get a warning or something like that, or if they're going to get a penalty, it would be known way before the checkered flag. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here, but something that gets away from this situation that you're talking about, where you have a podium ceremony and then you have a wait around of several hours, and then you find out the results are all changed. I think it's bad enough that the results are changed. That's a nightmare, really. But if you're going to change them, it needs to be, as soon as possible after the race, and ideally before the race is finished. Even if it's in the form of long laps or something like that. But yeah, it's. I think everybody's always, just about everybody has been sceptical about this tyre pressure rule. It's a strange sort of, it's sort of a rule designed by a committee sort of situation, isn't it? Where everyone's sort of added a bit or taken a bit away, and you speak to people and they're like, well, we don't like this bit either, or we don't like that bit, and it's ended up with this this sort of compromise that clearly has the potential to really mess up the event, the show, the result. And the sooner some better way is found, the better. So here we are. We've got start systems that need to be looked at. And now we've got the tire pressure thing again. So there's another one that could be added to the list. So yeah, let's see what happens in Jerez. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's not the first time this has cropped up, but it does just seem like there was a feeling, wasn't there, that it would settle down, that the teams would get used to it, they would get the data for the tyres, and that these penalties wouldn't crop up. But as we've all been explaining here, it's just too unpredictable for the teams to be able to get things perfectly right. Even no one's trying to cheat. Tech12 weren't trying to run Maverick under the pressure. It's just too difficult to do, and that's what makes these kind of penalties, I think, feel so unfair, because nobody's really done anything wrong.
Yeah, Lewis, anything to add on that?
I think when it comes to the penalties, if there's not a quick solution to this, which involves a new tyre, the penalties need to be looked at. Essentially, if like you say, like Pete says, there's no performance gain really. It's ultimately a safety thing, and there is a very small part of me that thinks if you're willing to run your bike in a dangerous situation, then you have to kind of accept the consequences anyway. That shouldn't really be regulated, but here we are. We know for a fact that tyres have been run below 1.8 bar and won races, and they've been absolutely fine. So, the fact that this is a safety issue, and we've obviously spoken about before that this creates a safety problem because riders are then having to push like crazy to get as far up the grid as possible on the first lap, which then creates all these contacts and chaos. Alex Marquez and Digi is a perfect kind of example of that. They know they can't get stuck behind each other and risk their tyre pressures ballooning because they were set to be running in clear air, and then you've got a dangerous situation there. Yeah. I think when it comes to the penalties, maybe they have to start looking at, we've seen with accidents and stuff like that where, long laps have been handed out for the next event, that type of thing. Start doing that. If you are below the tyre pressure minimum, keep the result, fine. But then, you start at the back of the grid for the next Grand Prix. At least do something that is at least a justifiable penalty, but doesn't kind of screw someone over for what is something they just cannot control, ultimately. But the thing is as well, I mean, say that was a crazy race that, for whatever reason there was massive gaps and Maverick gets a 16-second penalty, he still ends up in, he doesn't drop that many positions. It's not a proportional punishment. We saw that Jerez in the sprint race last year with Fabio Quartararo. Yes, it's a lesser penalty, but he went from 3rd to 5th because there was such a massive spread, because it was such a weird race, because there was all these crashes, and it's not. So then you're saying, are you saying then that one person drops 8 seconds and drops from 2nd to 10th in the sprint race, for example, they've done something more severe than someone finishing 3rd and dropping to 5th because the gaps are. It's not proportional. It doesn't work. So I think they have to look at something that is a post-race, something that there's a negative consequence for the next Grand Prix, that it doesn't really affect them for what was something they can't control.
Yeah. Do you know what? I said it last year when we talked about tyre pressures. I was fed up with it. I'm just fed up with this whole crystal ball. You need to have it to kind of set it to where you think you're going to be. You can't predict racing. This is what I hate. Like, the teams I feel sorry for in that sense, that they have to, we have to put it this way because, say, he gets stuck in the past. It's like, you could just end up leading by chance because of an incident, or you don't know. And this is the thing that needs to change for me. These guys try their best, but they don't have crystal balls, and they can't look in the future and say, this is where we need to be here. Just if I don't want to talk about it anymore this year, but I know I am, because it's going to happen again. So yeah, we'll park that there. And I just want to say, I'll give a round out here, because Maverick's penalty does mean Frankie Morbidelli gets a 3rd place. I thought he was quite solid over the weekend. Johan Zarco, I mean, no one's even talked about this hardly. He's P4 in the Honda, which is just mega, to be honest, for Zarco and Honda. Probably one of the standout rides of the weekend. Framing Aldegar, again, I think his trajectory is going right the way, as Frankie Carcetti said to us on our podcast last year. If you get a rookie to kind of build and build and build, we're seeing that with him. It's working out really well. Alex Marquez is in P6 behind him. I mean, Alex kind of salvaged a decent result there after his shenanigans in the race. Fabio Quartararo in P7. I mean, his qualifying was pretty special, I will say that. It was really good to see him on the front row for the first time since 2022. Can you believe that? Like, that's a crazy stat. And yeah, Pedro Acosta in P8, Marco Bezzecchi in P9, and Luca Marini rounds out top 10. And I think Marini's starting to consistently build there. He's around that just outside the top 10 mark, and this has obviously helped him. But I'm seeing a lot of progress there from him. Obviously, the other side of the Honda garage, Joan Mir had an absolutely disastrous weekend. Illness struck him down, and then he got hit by Fabio Di Gianantonio in the Grand Prix, which just compounded a tough weekend for Mir. Nothing seems to go right over the whole weekend for Joan, but I think in Jerez, I pray that he has a good weekend because I want to see it. He deserves it. He has the speed to get there. And yeah, Pramac had a really tough weekend. Both of Jack Miller and Augusto Fernandez crashed out. That's really it from the weekend for me. There was so much that happened. I think we've done a really good job, gents, of covering it because there's so much fallout from it all. And we're going to have another week to talk about it. But the final takeaway from me, Marc Marquez is going to take some stopping. I don't want to hear the same argument that now Pecco Bagnaia is going to Jerez. Yes, he has won the last 3 Grand Prix there. But you think of that race last year, Marc Marquez on the GP23 versus the 24. We got an absolutely epic race. What are they going to do on Eco Machinery this time round? I hope for an epic race, but it's playing to a script now where Marc Marquez is just going to... If he wants to do it for the fans, and like he says, he can control it, brilliant. Why would he if he knows that he can just go and win? I think the next few rounds for him are setting up very nicely. We've got Aragon on the horizon. Who's going to stop this 93? That's what I just think. Pete, what's your takeaway from the weekend?
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think it's getting into sort of the last chance saloon as far as anyone challenging Marc for the title. I think that will be Jerez. We have seen Bagnaia. He's had some sort of shaky early rounds in the past, and then get into his stride later, but the clock is ticking on that. And I think Jerez, as you say, for the reasons that it is really a Bagnaia track, is almost the last chance for him to really make an impression on the championship. I think, yeah, he'll win races. Some others will probably win races. There'll be circumstances that arise. But if we're talking about the championship, at the moment, Marc is just building and building and building and building, isn't he? And we're yet to see him, as we saw in Qatar, we're yet to see him really pushed to the limit for a full Grand Prix distance, I think. And that's the first chance. Forget about even beating him. Just push him to the end of a race. That's the next step. And we've got to wait and see if someone can do it at Jerez. But smaller track. Let's see. You mentioned the Hondas. Let's see what they can do there.
Yeah.
I hate to end it on the tyre pressure penalty again, but just imagine if Zarco had, a couple of tenths behind Morbidelli, if he'd have got that 4th place. And it would have been him on the podium, and we would never have seen it. So, again, on that note, I'll leave it there.
It's not even. It's literally under. It's just under 2 tenths the gap. Just had a look there. So, that could have been a Honda podium, which would have been, in the circumstances, pretty special when you think about it. But who knows what happens at Jerez, Lewis? I think one thing I'll take away from Qatar, I wonder how Marc Marquez felt on a red Ducati after getting beat by the Vizioso all those years, thinking, I understand now on this thing what it's like to win around the track. Did he get beat on by the factory bike? It must have been pretty satisfying.
Yeah, it's like you said, Jordan, we're just seeing a new version of Marc Marquez, a more complete version, a more tactically intelligent Marc Marquez, which is a problem for the rest because he's always been a good sort of reader of race situations. And we go to a race now, which a lot will be made of last year's fight between the two of them, but the circumstances of that, in the context, you look at it, Marc was his 5th race on the Ducati. It was what was billed as a GP23, but it wasn't a very high spec GP23, let's say that, and he came within tenths of beating Pecco in the full factory bike. So is that really just going to be a repeat this year? I can't see it. You look at everything we've seen so far, and just every scenario that's come up, and Marquez has just found a new way to be better.
Yeah,
and I can't see that changing.
Yeah. Well, we'll be back next week to preview Jerez, and we'll see what comes out of the Jorge Martin stuff. Keep it on social media and Christ.net for that. We'll have everything covered there. But yeah, let us know your thoughts on the Qatar Grand Prix weekend. It was a decent weekend, to be honest, and I think that if we get more like that in terms of a race sort of thing with more manufacturers up there, it would be quite nice. But we'll end it there, and subscribe, comment, like if you're watching on YouTube, listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Hit the follow button and the 5-star review button as well. That'd be pretty much appreciated from all of us here. Until next time, we'll see you then.